The log cabin is a really popular traditional quilt block, but you can add some sparkle to it by putting a star in the middle. Today, I'm going to show you how to make Star in the Cabin. Welcome to Epida Studio. My name is Elizabeth and I help you make beautiful things with quilting, pajagi, and embroidery. So a log cabin is a traditional quilt block that has a square in the middle and then bars that go around that, usually with dark on one side and light on the other side. And you can make a lot of fun quilt designs with the log cabin block. But today I'm just going to mix it up a bit and I'm going to show you how to put this little sawtooth star in the middle of the log cabin block. So this block is called Star in the Cabin, and I'm going to be making one that finishes at 9 inches. So for this, you can see I used 4 different fabrics. I have 2 different light fabrics in the background, and then a dark for the star, and then this medium for the bars. But of course, you could match these colors if you wanted, using only 1 light and 1 dark, or you could make it scrappy. You could play around with colors however you want. But once you've chosen the fabrics that you need, then let's get started. So for the center little sawtooth star for this block, you're going to need a 2.5 inch square of the dark fabric, 8 1.5 inch squares of dark fabric, then 4 pieces that are 1.5 by 2.5 of this light fabric, and then 4 1.5 inch squares of the light fabric. And then for the log cabin part of the star in the log cabin, you need a bunch of pieces. These are all 1.5 inches wide. And of the lighter fabric, you're going to need a 5.5 inch, 6.5, 7.5, and 8.5 inch long piece. And for the darker fabric, you're going to need 4.5, 5.5, 6.5, 7.5, 8.5, and 9.5. And so if you can't remember all those, don't worry. You can click the link below. I have a full written tutorial that has those numbers all written out. So you can check that out if you can't remember. But I will be confirming the measurements as we go along. So for the little sawtooth star in the middle, it has a square in the center and then has little flying geese units that go around it. So I'm going to be making those flying geese using the easiest ever technique. And the reason why I'm doing that is because these flying geese are very small. They're 1.5 inches by 2.5 inches. So for very small pieces, I like this technique because it's easy to do and there's not a lot of trimming, and the waste is pretty minimal. And so if you prefer a different method for making your flying geese, then feel free to use whatever method you want. You'll have to cut your fabric differently, but you're going to want flying geese that end up to be 1.5 by 2.5, and it has the light fabric as a big triangle and the dark fabric as the 2 small triangles. So the way you do the easiest ever method is you take your dark triangle and you line it up on the end with your rectangle, and then you'll stitch right on the diagonal line, corner to corner, and then trim off the extra and then fold it back. And so your one triangle will look like this. And then you'll do the same thing on the other side. You will stitch that on and then fold it back. It will look like this. And so if you want a full detailed tutorial for how I do that, you can also look below. I have a full detailed tutorial, but I'm going to start by stitching 1 square onto the edge of each rectangle, and we're stitching right from corner to corner. So you can mark the lines with a pencil or a marking pen, draw them onto there, or if you have a piece of tape on your sewing machine for a shortcut to line up that line, you can do that. Because the seam is really short, then tape is a really good shortcut for that. But however you're comfortable doing that, we're going to stitch that corner to corner, and then we're going to cut off the excess and then fold it back. So it's also the same way that you do a snowball block, or sometimes it's called stitch and flip. That's what we're going to be doing. So now I have the 1 triangle on. I'm just going to repeat with the squares on the other side, and just make sure that you're stitching in the correct orientation. You don't want to accidentally stitch this way so it ends up with a parallelogram instead of a triangle. Make sure you're stitching in opposite directions. So now that these little flying geese are done, we're ready to put it into this little baby sawtooth star. So our 2.5 inch square goes in the middle, and then at north, south, east, and west, we put these flying geese, and we put it so that the dark triangles are touching the dark square. And then in the corner, we put our light squares. So we can see it's just the same way you would do any sawtooth star block. It's just little itty bitty. And so now we have our 9 pieces. We're going to join it just like we would do a 9-patch block. We're going to join these pieces into rows, and then we'll be able to join those rows together. So here's our 3 rows joined. Now for pressing, I pressed these seams underneath these side squares, these seams underneath the center square, and these side squares. So all the seams are pressed away from the flying geese, and that will just help the seams be flatter. So that means in this seam, it is pressed underneath the lighter fabric, and that is fine because pressing away from a diagonal seam has priority over pressing away from lighter fabrics. So now those seams will nest together nicely, and we can easily join those together, and we'll have our little sawtooth star. So now we have this little sawtooth star, and this should be 4.5 inches square. And this is going to be the middle for our log cabin block. So we're going to put this in the middle, and then we have all our strips that we cut before. So we're going to start with the dark fabric, and we're going to put these out. I guess I'm going counterclockwise. You could also go clockwise. I don't think there's a law about how log cabins are supposed to go together, but we'll put 2 dark, and then on the other corner we'll put 2 light, and we're just going from the smaller, the shorter strips up to the longer strips. So this one is 4.5 inches, this is 5.5 inches. This is 5.5 inches, and this one is 6.5 inches. And so we're going to add those in this order. First I'll add this one on, then I'll add this one, and this one, and that will be 1 row around it. And with each one of these, we want to press the seams towards this block, so away from the center star that we have, because there's a lot of seams in these points, and if we can press it so that this stays flat, then it will help the whole block be flatter. So here's our star with all the bars put on. So now it's time to add the next round of bars. And when I put the first ones on, I said there wasn't really a law about how to put them on, and there's not really, except if you're doing a whole bunch of blocks, then you probably want to do them all the same way. And also now when I'm putting on the next round, I want to put those on in the same direction. So I'm going counterclockwise with these as well. And so I'll start with the dark ones over here. So this one is the 6.5 inches. This one is the 7.5 inches. And now from the light, we have 7.5 inches and 8.5 inches. So we will put our next round of bars onto it just the same way. So here it is now that that round has been added, and this block is kind of looking like it's done. And right now it is 8.5 inches square, so that could be the complete block. But we want a block that is 9.5 inches square, so that means we're going to add just 2 more pieces. So we have just these 2 more dark pieces that are 8.5 inches and 9.5 inches. So you can see this is not a full round. It's just going on the one corner to give it the size we wanted. If we wanted to make this even bigger, we could keep adding. If we added another set of white bars, it would be a 10.5 inch block, and then we could keep going 11.5, 12.5, whatever we wanted. We can easily adapt this. But to make it a 9.5 inch, we're going to add one more. So that means there are more dark bars than there are light bars. That's fine. With log cabin, they don't always have to be balanced with the same number of bars on both sides. Also, if I'd have chosen, I could have done these as light bars and those as dark bars, so there would have been more light and fewer dark. That's fine too. You can have fun playing around with different color combinations and designs however you want to do it. But for this block, I'm just going to add these 2 bars on just the same way, and then the block's going to be finished. So here's the finished block. It's 9.5 inches, so that means it's going to finish at 9 inches in your quilt. So you can see that you could adapt this idea with many different designs. You could put any star or any other block that you wanted in the middle of this log cabin. As long as this is something that finishes at 4 inches, it will fit into this pattern. So you can have fun playing with this. You could make a quilt that has all different stars in the middle, or you could use other blocks that were not stars, whatever you want to do. So have fun playing with this block and this idea in your next quilt project. And for more quilting tutorials, patterns, and inspiration, be sure to check out my website, epidastudio.com.